Hi, good evening. It's Richard Little from Your Land Partner. It's video number 52 out of 100. And we're in midst of a sort of mini series of 9, 10 or 11 videos, can't remember how many it is, to do with planning. And today I'm going to talk about developer contributions. Sometimes a much misunderstood area of planning and the implications on a project in terms of generally cash, but other things as well, timelines, etc. So it's quite a big subject. So what I plan to do is give an overall introduction to developer contributions, and then do a bit of a deep dive into part of it, and save the juiciest developer contribution, affordable housing, for tomorrow's content. Because those of you know that much about affordable housing, there's a lot we can talk about. Those of you who don't know much about it, you probably need to know quite a bit if you're going to get involved in projects where affordable housing may become an expected developer contribution. So that's tomorrow. But today, so developer contributions, it's effectively exactly what it says. It's a contribution made by the developer, nearly always to the local authority, the local planning authority, in some form or other. It doesn't just mean money, it also means certain works that can be instructed. So we're looking at two things. First of all, we're looking at community infrastructure levy, which is not in every area as yet, may not reach some areas. I suspect it will do, but there aren't that many areas that don't have it at the moment. And some areas also have a second tier of community infrastructure levy, which is a mayoral levy. So those areas that have got the mayors, like London, they have a second level. Those areas that have mayors or will be getting mayors, so the bigger cities, etc., the bigger urban areas, is if you haven't got a second level of community infrastructure levy by now, you probably will be getting one, or an adjusted CIL, and it's an ever moving thing, CIL. So basically, that is a financial contribution. It varies in every planning authority. It varies as to what you might be building and where you might be building it. So, for instance, primarily we're talking about house building, so residential stuff. Now, in some areas, there is very little contribution. It's generally based on so much per square metre of increased floor area. So sometimes if you've got an existing building, you may be able to subtract the floor area of the existing building, maybe, not always. So, there'll always be somebody that says, oh, that doesn't happen in our area. And it is very, very different in area to area. The amounts can be tiered. They can be borough or authority wide. So, for instance, residential development, every square metre, effectively, generally above 100 square metres, generally sort of anything above that will attract a contribution, and it could be, say, £50 a square metre. They vary so much, and we've seen them probably as low as 20-ish, and up into the more than £100 or so. Now, if you think of every square metre that you actually create, additional square metre you create, you've got to make a contribution of X amount of pounds, with perhaps an average house of being, perhaps 90 square metres, 90 square metres at £50, £4.5 grand. Yeah. So it's not an insignificant amount of money. The information on what the community infrastructure levy, the CIL, is in any given area is pretty much available on the planning portal, so local authority website. Some authorities have got specific documents about it, and it's quite well laid out, and it tells you all of the expectations, the payment type terms, etc. And others, search for it, you might find it. But it is out there. There are also some, so we subscribe to something called a planning magazine. Anybody that's a developer, it's pretty useful to do that. It's not a massive amount of money, a couple £100 a year. No, I don't get commission, but it's well worth it. Again, it's lingo, tells you about things like developer contributions, tells you about certain local plans and things. So it's well worth it. And within that, there is a database of every area where they are with their community infrastructure levy. So it might not be in place right now, but it might be coming. And the key thing here, your nugget, if you like, your takeaway point here, is that it is charged at date of planning consent. Not when you put the planning application in. And for those of you who have had applications that roll on a few years, you might not even have heard of CIL when it starts. But actually, by the time it comes out, that will be there. Yeah. So it's unlike other planning obligations, like some of the Section 106, which we'll talk about in a minute. But it's actually charged at date of planning consent. So they will have published rates in areas where it is in existence. There will be consultation documents and early warning documents, if you like, of when it's coming in. So we'll know when it's coming in. They'll go out to consultation. It can take 2 years or so by the time they start talking about it to the time it's implemented. So there's no excuse, that you're going to miss it. But the published amount, say it was out 5 years ago, so 2015, the published amount might be £50 a metre for the particular type of development. Just remember what I was saying, different types of development, so different types of commercial, hotel, student accommodation, retail, leisure, all can attract different levels of CIL. And some of this is to attract certain types of development, and some of it is to actually put it off. So in certain areas, there's quite a high CIL charge on student housing because they want to control it. They actually, they don't really want too much more, or they want to control the amount. So anyway, so it's published 5 years ago. It's £50 a square metre, but the planning consent comes through in 2020, and that base number is indexed. Yeah, so it will go up every year. But they don't always publish what the current index rate is. So you need to have a little look at that. So for instance, £50 5 years ago could quite easily be £65 now. Might not seem a lot of difference, you think, but if actually, we're building 100 houses at £4,500, that's 450,000. So if we get a 10 or 15% hike on that, it's another £50,000-60,000. It's significant amounts of money. So be very, very aware. And when you've got the mayoral, the second level of CIL, then it's both. Yeah, so it's to say the information is there. It's not that hidden in most authorities, but you might have to dig around perhaps a little bit. But you need to know this, and you need to know, right? Okay, from the time I put my planning consent in, when I'm doing my financial appraisal, if you like, how much should I allow? Well, you shouldn't allow what it is now. You need to allow what it is in perhaps a year's time or 2 years' time, because if you don't, that bit's going to come out of your margin, out of your profit. And again, it's only a little bit, you might think, but some of the CIL contributions are eye-watering in some areas. So, I said we thought of something with 100. I'm fairly certain we've got one in one of our patches that's now £200. Yeah, £200 a square metre. And that is some chunky bits of change. For our 90 square metre house, that's suddenly £18,000. And that is just the CIL. So in some areas, you've got CIL and no Section 106. So Section 106 is effectively a planning obligation. Yeah. Now, this is at the point when I start talking about planning gain, because this is what planning gain actually means in planning terms, in local authority terms, not in networking terms, in many education circles. They talk about planning gain, so it has taken on a bit of a different meaning in terms of, in the wider terms, people start thinking about the amount of money that they're actually going to gain, but actually that's not what it is. A planning obligation effectively is a planning gain. So it's what the local community, the local authority, gain from that planning permission. So it's their planning gain, yeah? So it's actually a contribution. It's actually a liability, not actually a benefit. It's, anyway, we won't dwell too much on that. So Section 106, so sections in some local planning authorities, we have Section 106, and Section 106 is the means to collect the planning obligation. So it's effectively a legal document. Sometimes it comes with something called a unilateral undertaking. Most of you shouldn't need to worry about that. If you're getting the right representation from planning consultants and from the legal side of things, they'll explain what that is and when that is necessary. But they say they're means of collecting a contribution or ensuring that certain work is done. So it's a planning obligation. So it is still a contribution. It isn't always about cash. It is sometimes about doing certain sorts of work. So, for instance, works to roads. Now, just to make it slightly more confusing, that's often collected under what we call a Section 278. Yeah, it's any work to highways, etc., is collected or enforced, if you like, under a different notice. So, Section 278, another legal agreement, it's another notice, basically. So don't get sort of too bogged down with that. But so some areas we have CIL. Some areas we have mayoral CIL, some areas we have Section 106, some areas only have one of those, some areas only have two of those, some areas have all three. So you need to be fairly clear on what your contributions is likely to be in a given area. So I'll come on to payment. I'll do a collective sort of bit on payment in a few minutes' time when we're looking at how the CIL is collected and how the 106 financial contributions are collected or can be collected, etc. So just to give you an idea, I said right at the beginning that Section 106 is more well known for collecting affordable housing. I'm going to talk tomorrow about affordable housing. I'll probably go on for far too long about affordable housing as a developer contribution because I see so many people fall into the trap that they just don't know. If you get it right, affordable housing is absolutely fantastic. Yeah, if you get it wrong, your project's gone. Yeah, and unfortunately, there's not enough people out there that really know this, and the very few people that they are, they can't help everybody. There's some good people out there quite happy to talk through things, but this is when you tend to pay for a bit of consultancy, etc. Obviously tomorrow I'm charging you anything. I'm just going to just give it. So tomorrow you probably need a pen and paper. So in terms of Section 106, so what sort of things does that cover apart from affordable housing? So it covers a multitude of things, and I think I'm probably somewhere as a list, and I think I'm about 45, 46, something like that, different contributions that you can pay in certain areas. Nowhere's got all of them, but actually some of them do have 4, 5, 6, even up to 8, 9 or 10. And there is a contribution for certain things. So just as a bit of an idea, carbon emissions, education, libraries, recycling facilities, transport, open space. Open space is one of those that you can be, if your site's big enough, there's an obligation to provide it on site. If you can't in certain areas, there's a financial contribution, so it actually goes towards open space elsewhere, the provision or the maintenance of. Social or community infrastructure, contributions towards that. Ecology and biodiversity, so things like protected sites. So sometimes there is a financial obligation in certain parts of the country. There's different sorts of things, different sort of protected sites and different like that, and you have to make a contribution which goes towards an upkeep or something somewhere else. But these are the sort of things that you can be contributing towards. Heritage stuff as well, health stuff, public art, Whenever I talk about public art, it always amazes me when people say, oh, it's a waste of council taxpayers' money and all that when they've got this new statue. Very often, it's developers that, in some areas, it's developers that are paying for that. People don't realise, and the council don't tell them, but it comes out of developer contributions, and sometimes it's because they got to spend it. Because it's been contributed for public art. So actually they've got a pot now. They've had a load of houses built in an area. They're collecting for public art. They might have £500,000. They've got to spend it. So what do? Commission what you and I might think is a useless piece of public art. But, so it's not always the council tax that paying that. Anyway, I'm sort of going on a bit. So hopefully that gives you an idea of some of the things outside of affordable housing that you can contribute for. I know in Liverpool it used to be the case. I'm not quite sure as it is now. You used to have to pay a financial contribution towards a tree. And we looked at a scheme probably about 4 years or so ago now. And the contribution for the scheme for trees alone was £400,000. I think it was. I can't remember quite what it was, but it was so many trees per unit, or so many trees per bedroom, or something like that, and it was so much per tree. Yeah, it was £400,000 just for trees. Yeah, so don't dismiss these and think, oh, they just want a few quid for a bit of library, education, medical centre, transport, metro cards in certain areas. You contribute towards the metro card system and things like that. Don't think they're always insignificant amounts. So I've seen quite a few financial appraisals come through where they've got the CIL, generally don't get it indexed, so there's a bit of a thing there. They've got the 106 affordable, generally get that wrong as well, but with a little bit of guidance, we get that adjusted. But they forget about all the other 106 stuff, and it can be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, as in our example. There are bigger developments. That was, I don't know, 60, 70 units, I think, something like that. Didn't go ahead, but you have to include it in your appraisal. And it is when we talk about financial stuff and where people get their costs wrong and things like that, developer contributions is very, very common to miss off quite a chunk of the actual contribution. So, as I said before, it's not always financial contribution. Sometimes it's to ensure that you get certain works done. So there's still a cost to it. So you have to cost that into your cost in your financial appraisal. So let's just finish up really in terms of collection. So payment, the payments of the financial contributions. Now it will vary. Sorry, I'm going to do the same thing. It does vary depending where you are. So let's start with CIL and mayoral CIL. So in some areas it appears to be set in stone. You will find that some of the larger developments, if you're doing larger developments, there's a little bit more scope for negotiation when the payments are made. So quite typically with CIL, you might have a payment when you start the project, and it may be 25%, let's say. Yeah. You then may have a payment when you are completing the project or before first occupation or at first occupation, which may be another 25%. You then may have another 25% that is maybe 3 months or 6 months post last completion. Not last occupation, because it'll be last completion, and it won't be, oh, we won't bother finishing that one off, so we hold back the payment. That you can try that, and in some areas it might work, and when money's tight you can get away with it for a while possibly. And then the final percentage may be a year or 2 years after completion. Now that's quite generous, and in some areas they won't offer you that straight away. But if you've got a financial contribution with your CIL and your 106, could be hundreds of thousands of pounds. Doesn't have to be a massive project to be hundreds of thousands of pounds, believe me. Yeah. So if you can actually eke that payment out, so you're actually paying it further down the line, and this is where a little bit of negotiation with the local authority, you get too arsey with them, and then this is where they can be quite difficult with you. There are also ways of convincing them that payments should be at a later date, if you like. But all of this is set out through your planning process, yeah. And you know, so whatever we do in the planning process, and particularly the 106, the 106 ends up as being a legal agreement, and pretty much always your planning consent will not be live, will not be fully consented until the 106 is signed. And if you sign the 106, yeah, that then becomes a legal commitment. And I will talk about the implications of that to do with affordable housing tomorrow, because some people get that badly wrong. Yeah. So in summary, the payments, they will have a fairly rigid plan of payments. Yeah. However, it can be negotiated. But what you will not be able to do is hold up those payments. If you hold those payments up and you're either looking for refinancing or you're looking for sale, so effectively crystallising, you know, a profit at an exit or crystallising a number at an exit, then your local searches somewhere along the lines, they'll come up and say, no, it's not complete, because you should be paying that money. So always make sure that you've paid the money that you've agreed to pay by those milestone dates, effectively, to make sure that they don't hold up any refinancing or any conveyancing in any way. So there is an awful lot that we can talk about detail in terms of developer contributions, but they're very much tailored to your area, whatever area you're in. So, and I could drone on, as you well know, for hours about most things, but I'm going to leave it there because I think that is pretty much a pretty detailed overview, if that's not a contradiction. And I'm going to look forward to those of you that join us tomorrow on the affordable housing, and then perhaps catch up with the videos. I know more people watch the videos because we put this out at random times, so we're not expecting a live audience. But affordable housing, guys, is you're either missing a trick because it's great, or you're missing a trick because you've got it wrong. And it's so important, yeah. And anybody that's doing generally larger projects, generally above 9, but in some areas it's not, it's still above 5. Doesn't matter what the MPPF necessarily says and what courts have said, and case, you know, you don't necessarily want to be fighting that stuff. So there can be that obligation of affordable housing, really low numbers, you know, certainly in rural areas and that. So again, there is no absolute on this. I can be telling you something and you could be saying, it's not like that in our area, but it may well be in another area. So I try and do a catch-all and catch as much as I can, but I'm sure somebody out there will say, you missed me out. But so I'm going to sign off now. I've been talking about developer contributions, specifically CIL, mayoral CIL, and Section 106 planning obligations. Mentioned the 278 as well, very briefly, highways, works, etc. And going to leave affordable housing and all of that excitement until tomorrow. So, been Richard Little, signing off. Catch you another day.